blather, blare. Other forms: blathers, blathering, blathered. To blather is to talk on and on without saying anything very important or wise. If you blather all afternoon, it might be a welcome distraction to your friend who's grieving the death of her cat. You can use the word blather as a noun too. You might hate riding the bus home from school because of all the silly blather around you. At a job, it might be acceptable to blather during your lunch break, but not once you get back to work. The verb came first, and it was originally Scottish, probably from the Old Norse word blara, mutter or wag the tongue. Wretched. Other forms: wretchedest, wretcheder. The fairy tale Cinderella gives us many examples of uses for the word wretched. Poor Cinderella had a wretched childhood, living in wretched conditions with a wretched stepmother. It would be enough to make anyone feel wretched, or absolutely terrible. Wretched is an all-around unhappy word. If you're very ill, heartbroken, or riddled with guilt, you may feel wretched. This word is also used to describe awful living conditions. If your cabin at sleepaway camp is freezing cold and rat-infested, you could describe it as wretched. And if you truly don't like someone, you might call that person wretched, though maybe not to his or her face. Definitions of wretched. Adjective: deserving or inciting pity. A wretched life, not favored by fortune. Marked or accompanied by or resulting in ill fortune. Adjective: characterized by physical misery. Providing or experiencing physical discomfort. Very unhappy, full of misery. Experiencing or marked by or causing sadness or sorrow or discontent. Morally reprehensible. Of very poor quality or condition. Embargo. Other forms: embargoes, embargoed, embargoing, embargoes. An embargo is an order stopping the movement of trade ships into or out of a country. If you can't get those yummy Swedish fish, perhaps there has been an embargo on trade with Sweden. The fact that ships cannot move during an embargo makes sense from the Latin root of the word, a verb meaning impede with barriers. If one government places a trade embargo on another, it can be an act of war between the two countries. But if an arms embargo is in place, many countries refuse to sell arms to a particular country because it is especially violent. As a verb, the use of embargo is a little broader. If you write an impassioned plea for peace, but the government embargoes it, no one will read your writing. Definitions of embargo. Noun: a government order imposing a trade barrier. Verb: ban the publication of documents, as for security or copyright reasons. Pandemonium. Other forms: pandemoniums. Pandemonium is chaos, total and utter craziness. Like the stampede after your team won the championship, when everyone spilled onto the field at once, bouncing off each other. If you look carefully at the word pandemonium, you'll see the word demon inside it. This makes sense, since the word pandemonium was coined in Milton's Paradise Lost, where it was the name of the palace built in the middle of hell. Milton wrote back in the 17th century. Nowadays, pandemonium crops up whenever journalists are describing a chaotic scene. High school students have been heard to use it to describe their lunchroom. A state of extreme confusion and disorder. Boisterous. Boisterous is a word used to describe someone spirited, loud, and slightly out of control. Like someone with a spring in their step and a song in their heart singing to strangers on the street. Boisterous means loud, clamorous, and unrestrained. Think of children on a playground or a lively party or a litter of puppies as boisterous. This word, which comes from Middle English, can also refer to very intense storms. You could call a hurricane boisterous, but you will most likely hear this word used to describe people. Definitions of boisterous. Adjective: full of rough and exuberant animal spirits. Displaying animation, vigor, or liveliness. Adjective: noisy and lacking in restraint or discipline. Undisciplined and unruly. Adjective: violently agitated and turbulent. Conundrum. Other forms: conundrums. The tricky word conundrum is used to describe a riddle or puzzle, sometimes including a play on words or pun. One of the most famous conundrums is the riddle of the Sphinx, famously in the play Oedipus the King by Sophocles. Oedipus encounters the Sphinx, a mythical beast, who asks him, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? The answer is, a person, crawling as a child, walking as an adult, and using a cane in old age. The scary thing is that if the Sphinx asked you the riddle and you didn't know, she'd eat you. Exonerate. Other forms. Exonerated, exonerating, exonerates. To exonerate someone is to declare him not guilty of criminal charges. This word is pretty much only used in reference to proceedings in a court of law. A word with a similar meaning that might be familiar is acquit. When your next-door neighbor was arrested for painting smiley faces on the front doors of all the houses on your block, evidence to exonerate him was discovered when the police found a young hooligan from the next street over with a basement full of paint canisters. The verb comes from the Latin exonerate, meaning freed from burden. A criminal charge is certainly a burden, and when you're exonerated, you're freed from that burden. Dwindle. Other forms. Dwindled, dwindles. What do love, money, and the earth all have in common? All can dwindle, or shrink away, if we don't handle them properly. The word dwindle has a wonderfully descriptive, almost childlike sound to it, as though it belongs in a nursery rhyme. That might help you remember the meaning, which is to shrink away gradually, like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, who dwindles away until nothing is left but his grin. Definitions of dwindle. Her savings dwindled down. Tantalize. Talas. Other forms. Tantalizing, tantalized, tantalizes. When you tantalize people, you torment them in a specific way, by showing them something they want but can't have. You could tantalize people with cavities and nut allergies by eating pecan pie in front of them. The word tantalize comes from a Greek story about a guy named Tantalus who was so evil that the gods of the underworld came up with a special punishment just for him. They were really good at that. They put him in a pool of water that drained away every time he bent down to drink. There was also a tree above his head that whisked away its juicy apples every time he tried to pick one. So, it only makes sense that to tantalize someone is to torture them with what they cannot have. Adultery. Other forms. Adulteries. Adultery is a word for cheating. Cheating on your spouse with another person. Adultery isn't a crime, but some people consider it a sin. If two people are dating, and one fools around with someone else, it's not adultery. Only married people can commit adultery. If you commit adultery, and your spouse finds out, then you've got a lot of explaining to do. Although it's still highly frowned upon, cultural attitudes toward adultery have changed a lot. The classic book The Scarlet Letter shows how harshly women were once treated for committing adultery. Goofy. Other forms. Goofily, goofiest, goofier. Anything goofy is ridiculous and cute, like a squirrel on a skateboard or a big football player snuggling a teddy bear after every touchdown. Goofy things are often well-intentioned but weird. Being awkward, telling dumb jokes and stories, or wearing crazy clothes are all great ways to be goofy. A goofy smile is sweet, unless you're in England where it means you have big crooked teeth. Goofy, the dopey Disney dog who is all of these things, was created in 1929 when the word was brand new. It comes from a variation on the English dialect goff, foolish clown. Alter ego. Other forms. Alter egos. Your alter ego is a person to whom you are so close that he almost seems like an essential part of you, and who understands your unique perspective on the world. You can use the noun alter ego to describe your very best friend, the person who knows you better than anyone else. The Latin meaning of alter ego is other self, and it was used by the ancient Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero in a letter to his friend and advisor, Atticus. You are a second brother to me, an alter ego to whom I can tell everything. Gentility. Gentility. Other forms. Gentilities. Anyone can be nice. Many people have good manners. But gentility is that rare kind of graciousness that is handed down from one elegant generation to the next. In the early 13th century, gentility described someone's social status, coming from the old French word gentil, meaning high-born, noble, of good family. Over time the word's meaning broadened to include those coming from a family whose members had a refined manner and an elegant way of expressing themselves. No title of nobility required, just as today anyone can be a gentleman, or woman. Definitions of gentility. Elegance by virtue of fineness of manner and expression. Bourgeois. Other forms. Bourgeoises. The adjective bourgeois means relating to or typical of the middle class. If someone says, "Oh, how bourgeois," it's probably an insult, meaning you're preoccupied with middle-class small-mindedness. As a noun, a bourgeois is a member of the middle class, originally a member of the middle class in France. The word was borrowed from French, from Old French burgess, citizen of a town, from bourg, town, village, from Latin burgus, fortress, castle. The derived word bourgeoisie, the middle class, is a later borrowing from French. Definitions of bourgeois. Adjective, according to Marxist thought, being of the property-owning class and exploitive of the working class. Synonyms, capitalist, capitalistic, favoring or practicing capitalism. Belonging to the middle class. Synonyms, middle class, occupying a socio-economic position intermediate between those of the lower classes and the wealthy. Adjective, conforming to the standards and conventions of the middle class. A bourgeois mentality, occupying a socio-economic position intermediate between those of the lower classes and the wealthy. A member of the middle class. A capitalist who engages in industrial commercial enterprise. Allied. Lad. Other forms, allied, allieding, allieds. To allied something is to omit it or get rid of it. If your parents are especially strict, you might tell them about the A you got on your English essay and allied the fact that you failed your math quiz. If your school is putting on a production of Grease, and the director cuts a major scene from the play, you can say she allies it. And when an elected official gives a speech, he's almost sure to allied certain topics that are too controversial or negative. Allied is also used in grammar to describe the way people speak when they leave out certain sounds. It comes from the Latin elidere, strike out or force out. This vowel is usually elided before a single consonant. Berate. Other forms, berated, berating, berates. A strong verb for harshly cutting someone down with words is berate. He didn't just correct the cashier who gave him the wrong change. He started to berate her, calling her names in front of the whole store. When you berate someone, you do more than just raise your voice at them. Berate implies putting someone down by insulting their character. This word comes from a 16th century English and French root meaning, to scold or blame. Often the anger behind the scolding seems over the top, as in, when the young man behind the counter dropped the scoop of vanilla, the manager berated him excessively by declaring him worthless and weak. Synonyms, bawl out, call down, call on the carpet, chew out, chew up, chide, dress down, have words, jaw, lambast, lambaste, lecture, rag, rebuke, remonstrate, reprimand, reproof, scathe, scold, take to task, trounce, vituperate. Defiant. Have you ever seen a picture of a protester who is about to be carried off by police but is still shouting or resisting, fighting to the bitter end? That person is defiant. Someone who is defiant is bold, even in the face of defeat. A defiant person is usually fighting a powerful enemy. People who protest in countries controlled by dictators are defiant. Rosa Parks was defiant when she refused to give up her seat on the bus, even though the law at that time dictated that black people had to stand when whites needed a seat. Small children are defiant too, sometimes over nothing more than a request to share their toys. Definitions of defiant. Adjective, boldly resisting authority or an opposing force. Brought up to be aggressive and defiant. A defiant attitude, disposed to or engaged in defiance of established authority. Noisily and stubbornly defiant. Recalcitrant, marked by stubborn resistance to authority. Hard to control, not obeying or complying with commands of those in authority. Not submissive to authority, not tractable. Difficult to manage or mold. Not disposed or inclined toward. Oblivious. Other forms, obliviously. If you don't notice or aren't aware, it means that the adjective oblivious applies to you. When we think of the adjective oblivious, it is usually in situations that involve being totally unaware of what's staring us right in the face. It can also mean being forgetful and absent-minded. The cartoon character Mr. Magoo is a perfect example of someone who is oblivious. His eyesight is so bad that he always gets himself into various scrapes and mishaps. For example, Mr. Magoo mistakes an airplane for a theater and instead of watching a movie, he takes a seat on a departing airplane. Definitions of oblivious. Adjective, followed by to, or, of, lacking conscious awareness of. Oblivious of the mounting pressures for political reform. Oblivious to the risks she ran. Often followed by backquote of, not aware. Failing to keep in mind. Avarice. Other forms, avarices. Avarice is a fancy word for good old-fashioned greed. It's one of what some call the 7 deadly sins. Do you want more and more money? Or cookies? Or video games? Or anything? Then your heart is full of avarice, which you probably know better is greed. When people talk about greed, it's clearly not a good thing, but avarice has an even worse flavor to it. Avarice is often looked upon as a sin, and it's always considered despicable and evil. Definitions of avarice. Reprehensible acquisitiveness. Insatiable desire for wealth, personified as one of the deadly sins. Insinuate. Other forms. Insinuating, insinuated, insinuates. Insinuate means you imply or suggest something that may or may not be true. If you say things seem to go wrong about the time your brother took over, you insinuate that he had something to do with the decline. There's another way to insinuate. Suppose you're in line to get into a popular dance club when a celebrity appears, surrounded by a big entourage. If you strike up a conversation with one of the entourage, you may be able to insinuate that you're part of the group and go in with them. Don't feel bad. People have been doing it at least since the 1520s, when insinuate evolved from the Latin word insinuare, meaning, wind one's way into. Verb. I insinuated that I did not like his wife. Introduce or insert oneself in a subtle manner. He insinuated himself into the conversation of the people at the nearby table. Spiteful. When you're spiteful, you act in a mean way, with a desire to hurt someone. If your little brother was driving you crazy, you could calmly ignore him, or you could give him a spiteful pinch. If you act or speak with the desire to hurt, bother, or infuriate someone, you are being spiteful. You could deliberately hurt someone's feelings or embarrass them with your spiteful words, or you could watch a jealous child give her friend a spiteful shove. The Latin word despectus, or scorn or contempt, became the English despite, later shortened to spite, or a desire to hurt someone. Adjective, showing malicious ill will and a desire to hurt, motivated by spite. A truly spiteful child. Fervid. Effarved. Other forms, fervider. Fervid can be used to describe something that is physically hot, such as a fervid day in August, but it is more often used to describe heated emotions like anger, love, or desire. When passions and emotions run wild, you should expect to hear some fervid language thrown about. The adjective fervid comes from the Latin fervidus, which means glowing, burning, or boiling. It is often used like the word fiery. You might hear a politician deliver a fervid speech if he or she is particularly worked up over an issue. Definitions of fervid. Having or expressing strong emotions. Extremely hot, set out. When the fervid heat subsides, Francis Trollope. Used of physical heat. Having a high or higher than desirable temperature or giving off heat or feeling or causing a sensation of heat or burning. Crony. Other forms, cronies. A crony rhymes with pony as a buddy, a close confidant you spend time with and trust. Your boss might make everyone at work angry if she keeps only giving raises to her cronies. While a crony is basically just a good pal or sidekick, the word sometimes has a negative connotation, that you and your crony are up to no good together. It also implies the idea of cronyism, or unfairly giving friends jobs or promotions they're not qualified for. Crony capitalism refers to doing that in an economic way, like people in government giving tax breaks to their friends. Crony is 17th century British student slang, from the Greek kronios, long-lasting. A close friend who accompanies his or her buddies in their activities. Inept. A clumsy, incompetent person, or an ineffective action, is inept. When you're inept, you don't know what you're doing or just can't get it done. Someone inept is bumbling, clueless, and ineffective. Inept people are dumb or clueless. They don't understand things. More than that, inept people are bad at what they do. An inept lawyer always loses cases. An inept figure skater wipes out on the ice. An inept postal worker loses mail and puts it in the wrong box. An inept person is downright bad at something. The opposite of inept is competent. Definitions of inept. Adjective, generally incompetent and ineffectual, not qualified or suited for a purpose. Adjective, revealing lack of perceptiveness or judgment or finesse. Not adroit. Adjective, not elegant or graceful in expression. If the rumor is true, can anything be more inept than to repeat it now? Disenchant. Disenchant. Other forms, disenchanted, disenchanting, disenchants. Definitions of disenchant. Dissemble. Deassemble. Other forms, dissembled, dissembles. To dissemble is to try to deceive someone. Your little brother tried to dissemble when you asked if he ate the last donut, but the chocolate icing on his face gave him away. Dissemble is a little more complicated than a straight lie or denial. When you dissemble, you disguise your true intentions or feelings behind a false appearance. To dissemble is to pretend that you don't know something, to pretend that you think one way when you act another way. He worked for 6 months at that company before they discovered he was dissembling. He had lied on his application about his credentials and education. Cogent. Other forms, cogently. When you make a cogent argument, it means your argument is clear and persuasive. In these days of 24-hour entertainment news and sound bite-sized explanations of complex government policy, it's hard to find a cogent argument amidst all the emotional outbursts. Cogent comes from a Latin word meaning to drive together, so cogent thinking is well organized, it hangs together. If you try to convince your mayor to build a new park by saying that playgrounds are good, seeing the sky is nice, and raccoons are cool, well, that's not a cogent argument, it's just random. But you could cogently argue that parks contribute to civic happiness by providing space for exercise, community, and encounters with nature. Definitions of cogent. Adjective, a cogent argument. Spurious. Something false or inauthentic is spurious. Don't trust spurious ideas and stories. Spurious statements often are lies, just as a spurious coin is a counterfeit coin, a fake. Anytime you see the word spurious, you're dealing with things that can't be trusted or accepted at face value. A spurious claim is one that's not backed up by the facts. A spurious argument relies on faulty reasoning, and maybe some lies. Politicians often accuse each other of saying things that are spurious and meant to deceive the voters. As long as you're honest, clear, and not trying to trick anyone, nobody can say you're being spurious. Definitions of spurious. Adjective, plausible but false, not in accordance with the fact or reality or actuality. Intended to deceive, a spurious work of art, not genuine, imitating something superior. Born out of wedlock, the dominions of both rulers passed away to their spurious or doubtful offspring. E.A. Freeman. Credulous. People who believe things easily without having to be convinced are credulous. Salespeople are always hoping that someone credulous picks up the phone during a sales call. Credulous comes from the 16th century Latin credulus, or easily believes. A synonym for credulous is gullible, and both terms describe a person who accepts something willingly without a lot of supporting facts. Calling someone credulous can imply that the person is naive and simple. An individual isn't necessarily insulted by being called credulous, though, because some objects of belief, like religions and unicorns, come with a willing leap of faith for believing in what is unseen. Definitions of credulous. Adjective, showing a lack of judgment or experience. So credulous he believes everything he reads. Synonyms, naive, naive. Marked by or showing unaffected simplicity and lack of guile or worldly experience. Disposed to believe on little evidence. The gimmick would convince none but the most credulous. A common but incorrect usage where "credulous" would be appropriate, credulous. Too credulous for your own good. Not inclined to ask questions. Marked by or showing unaffected simplicity and lack of guile or worldly experience. Inclined to believe or confide readily, full of trust. Consummate. Connaissant. Consmet. Other forms. Consummated, consummately, consummating, consummates. Consummate means complete, finished, or masterful. If you refer to someone as a consummate chef, then you are saying he is the ultimate chef. If you say someone is a consummate jerk, then you are saying he is the ultimate jerk. Consummate can be used to describe something good or bad. Consummate joy, a consummate liar. To consummate means to bring something to completion, but it often refers specifically to making a marriage complete by having sexual relations. The adjective is pronounced con-smit, but the verb is pronounced con-smat. Definitions of consummate, connaissant. Adjective, having or revealing supreme mastery or skill. A consummate artist, consummate skill, having or showing or requiring special skill. Adjective, perfect and complete in every respect, having all necessary qualities. Consummate happiness, a consummate performance, being complete of its kind and without defect or blemish. Adjective, without qualification, used informally as, often pejorative, intensifiers. Synonyms, errant, complete, double-dyed, everlasting, gross, perfect, pure, sodding, staring, stark, thoroughgoing, unadulterated, utter. Not diminished or moderated in intensity or severity, sometimes used as an intensifier. Prevaricate. Prevaricate. Other forms. Prevaricated, prevaricating, prevaricates. When you prevaricate, you lie or mislead. Now, go ahead and tell me whether you already knew that meaning, and don't prevaricate about it. Give me the story straight. While prevaricate basically means to lie, it also has the sense of making it hard to know exactly what the lie was. You talk in a confusing way, go back and forth, and as deliberately as possible mislead someone. Government officials, bureaucrats, and sneaky types prevaricate in the hopes that it will be too difficult to figure out whether they've been doing something wrong. Don't prevaricate with your parents. It will definitely make you look guilty, but they just won't be sure of what. Be deliberately ambiguous or unclear in order to mislead or withhold information. Secluded. Other forms. Secludedly. A secluded place is isolated, away from other people. It's quiet, and there's not a lot going on. Sometimes you need to get away from it all to some place where no one will find you. What you seek is a secluded area where you can be alone. A secluded spot conjures the image of some place removed from the intrusions of life. A writer might want to be secluded so she can get work done, and a couple might want to be secluded so they can spend time together. When you're secluded, there aren't many other people or distractions. Definitions of secluded. Adjective. Hidden from general view or use. Confined to particular persons or groups or providing privacy. Ethereal. Other forms. Ethereally. Something ethereal is airy and insubstantial, like a ghostly figure at the top of the stairs. This word can also describe something delicate and light, like a singer's ethereal voice. Ethereal comes from the Greek word for ether, which means air, or more specifically, the upper regions of space. An ethereal substance or sound is one that carries the feeling of light and air, something you might see in a vision that strikes you as heavenly or supernatural. Definitions of ethereal. Adjective. Characterized by lightness and insubstantiality, as impalpable or intangible as air. Physical rather than ethereal forms, lacking material form or substance, unreal. Adjective. Characterized by unusual lightness and delicacy, exquisitely fine and subtle and pleasing, susceptible to injury. Adjective. Of heaven or the spirit. Confidant. Other forms. Confidence. A confidant is the person you tell your secrets to. Your confidant has all the dirt on you, so don't forget his birthday or he might start talking. Confidants are people you trust enough to tell anything, like that you cried during the Muppet movie. They might give advice, too. The president has lots of confidants in his inner circle who not only know all about secret government issues, but also give their opinions about what actions he should take. Make sure to spell the word with the "an" ending, because confident means something else. Think of confiding in your aunt, your confidant. Someone to whom private matters are confided. Altercation. Other forms. Altercations. Altercation is a nicer word for quarrel, which is a nicer word for fight. Fight is a simple, effective one-syllable word, while quarrel is a softer, two-syllable word, and altercation is a very civilized-sounding four-syllable word for the same uncivilized thing. A noisy argument between angry people. Someone who gets a black eye fighting for a parking spot might, after cooling down, describe the incident as an altercation rather than as a knockdown, drag-out brawl. Tyranny. Other forms. Tyrannies. Tyranny is a noun that describes a repressive and arbitrarily cruel regime. Don't accuse your mother of tyranny just because she won't let you play video games all weekend long. One of the root words of tyranny is the Latin tyrannia, which means the rule of a tyrant, and a tyrant is a cruel master. Today, it can mean the repressive regime of a dictator, or it can also mean being controlled by something metaphorically harsh like time or work. Maybe the oldest example of a tyranny is that of Tyrannosaurus rex, or king of the giant lizards, who many of us grew up thinking was the largest, most predatory and frightening of the dinosaurs, who supposedly ruled over the rest of the dinosaur world with its huge, sharp teeth and claws. A form of government in which the ruler is an absolute dictator, not restricted by a constitution or laws or opposition, etc. Synonyms. Caesarism, Stalinism, absolutism, authoritarianism, despotism, dictatorship, monocracy, one-man rule, shogunate, totalitarianism. Dominance through threat of punishment and violence. Exuberance. Exuberance. Other forms. Exuberances. Use exuberance to describe joyful enthusiasm and liveliness. You appreciate the natural exuberance of small children, but you prefer to enjoy it from a distance. The noun exuberance comes from the adjective exuberant, which itself came from a Latin word that originally described an overflowing supply of milk from the udder of a cow or goat. The word still means overflowing, not with milk but with joy and enthusiasm. After your winning home run, the fans ran onto the field and, in their exuberance, carried you off on their shoulders before you touched home plate. Write off. Other forms: written off, wrote off, writing off, writes off. Concede. Verb. Concede the loss or worthlessness of something or somebody. Write something fluently, and without hesitation. Acquisitive. Quiz TV. Other forms: acquisitively. It may seem like your acquisitive cousin never talks about anything but shopping. Someone who's acquisitive is preoccupied with possessing material things. If you were trying to improve yourself by becoming less acquisitive, you might destroy your credit cards and force yourself to take a break from buying things. The adjective acquisitive comes from Latin word for accumulate, acquirere. So when you're consumed with accumulating more and more, you can describe yourself as acquisitive. It's an easy word to confuse with inquisitive, which means curious or inquiring. It's much better to be inquisitive than acquisitive. Definitions of acquisitive. Adjective: eager to acquire and possess things, especially material possessions or ideas. An acquisitive mind. An acquisitive society in which the craving for material things seems never satisfied. Marked by acquiring or amassing. A moderately desirous of acquiring, e.g. wealth. Desirous of owning. Given to taking by force what is desired. Living by or given to victimizing others for personal gain. Excessively greedy and grasping. Meanly avaricious and mercenary. Reprehensible. Arpiarnsable. Reprehensible means deserving of blame or strong criticism. It is a strong word. Your mother might forgive you for doing something bad, but something reprehensible? That's worse. If a politician steals funds that are meant to provide care for the elderly, that's reprehensible. Near synonyms of this adjective are blameworthy and culpable. The word reprehensible is from Middle English, from Latin reprehensus, plus the suffix abilis, deserving of, capable of. If someone is reprehended, they are blamed or strongly criticized. Definitions of reprehensible. Bringing or deserving severe rebuke or censure. Adultery is as reprehensible for a husband as for a wife. Coveted. Coveted means in demand or desired. If the most coveted seat on the bus for you is the one right next to the bathroom, then you shouldn't have any problem getting it because most people don't want it. Coveted comes from the Latin cupiditas, meaning passionate desire, eagerness, ambition. Cupid isn't always involved, though. Coveted is another way of saying sought after. The poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox said, "If you are seeking health, wealth, usefulness, skill in any direction, there is nothing and no one who can hinder your attainment of the coveted boon, if you are willing to work and wait. So get to work for all that coveted health and wealth." Dignified. Other forms: dignifiedly. Dignified means self-respecting and worthy. If you want to have a dignified memorial service, skip the karaoke machine and instead softly play the favorite music of the person you're remembering. Something that has dignity is honorable and worthy. So something that is dignified acts in an honorable, worthy way, showing great self-respect and respect for others. If someone handles a terrible public embarrassment gracefully and without breaking down, we might compliment her dignified manner. You might be too dignified to engage in screaming at the wrestling match, or too dignified to beg for a job even in hard times. Definitions of dignified. Adjective: having or expressing dignity, especially formality or stateliness in bearing or appearance. Her dignified demeanor. The director of the school was a dignified white-haired gentleman, serenely self-possessed and free from agitation, especially in times of stress. Refined or imposing in manner or appearance, befitting a royal court. Used of a person's appearance or behavior, befitting an eminent person. Refined and tasteful in appearance or behavior or style. From vocabulary.com. Resilient. Other forms: resiliently. When something is strong and able to recover from damage quickly, call it resilient. If you're rough on your toys, the ones that don't break are resilient. Formed from the Latin verb resiliere, to leap back. A resilient person is able to recover from an illness or a bad experience quickly. Politicians who are resilient to media criticism do not let critical journalists affect their focus, performance, or relationship to their constituents. An object that is bent or stretched and returns to its original shape quickly is also resilient. Definitions of resilient. Adjective: recovering readily from adversity, depression, or the like. Displaying animation, vigor, or liveliness. Elastic: rebounding readily. As resilient as seasoned hickory. Vocabulary.com. Impeach. Other forms: impeached, impeaching, impeaches. Impeach means to charge someone with doing something wrong, specifically a high government official, such as the U.S. president, a senator, or a federal judge. Fortunately, very few presidents have had the dishonor of being impeached. If you impeach a president, you charge him or her with a crime. Congress may vote to impeach a president, but being impeached is only the first step in removing an official from office. Impeach comes from the Latin impedicare, meaning catch, entangle. To impeach also means to cast doubt on someone's character. In a courtroom, a lawyer could impeach the credibility of a witness in order to discredit whatever that person said. Definitions of impeach. Verb: bring an accusation against, level a charge against. Charge: a public official, with an offense or misdemeanor committed while in office. The president was impeached. Discernible. Discernible. Other forms: discernibly. Discernible means noticeable. If your extra hours training are having no discernible influence on your basketball game, it means your game has not changed. You can use discernible in two senses. First, you can use it to describe something you physically see. Because the sky was so clear, the ship was discernible from miles off. You can also use it to describe something you sense or understand. When your younger brother told he was sorry he broke your baseball bat, the truth was discernible in his voice. Definitions of discernible. Adjective: perceptible by the senses or intellect. Things happen in the earth and sky with no discernible cause. The newspaper reports no discernible progress in the negotiations. The skyline is easily discernible even at a distance of several miles. Capable of being perceived clearly. An essay with a meaning that was not always discernible. Astute. Other forms: astutist, astuter. Someone who is astute is clever and has good judgment. The kid running around with a bucket stuck on his head? Not so astute. Astute, from Latin, is a formal and flattering adjective for someone with a good head on their shoulders. It differs from its synonym shrewd in placing less emphasis on hard-headedness than on sensitivity. We talk about a shrewd bargainer but an astute interpretation. Other synonyms are perceptive, emphasizing insight, and discerning, emphasizing an ability to distinguish. Definitions of astute. Marked by practical hard-headed intelligence. An astute tenant always reads the small print in a lease. Contrite. We are sorry to inform you that the adjective contrite means regretful, remorseful, or even guilty. Someone who feels remorse or guilt is contrite, and in addition to feeling sorry, part of the definition includes wanting to atone for having done something wrong. The word comes from the Latin roots com, meaning together, and terere, which means to rub. It's also related to the Latin word conterere and is defined as to bruise. In the field of theology, being contrite is being remorseful for past sin and resolved to avoid future sin.